Hello and welcome to the Continuous Self-Assessment podcast. Today we are looking at the Quality and Impact Standard, and we have quite a team with us today. My name is Yvonne Thorogood. I'm the Learning Engagement Officer here at Homestart UK, and as always we've got Steve Griffiths with us. He's our Quality Improvement Specialist. And joining us today as special guests, we've got Chucky Palmer Patel. She's our Quality Compliance and Risk Manager. Michael Sales, he's our Data Coordinator. Prue Reynolds, who is a Chair of Trustees at Homestart Oxford, and she's also the Chair of our Quality Reference Group. And Sarah McMullen, who is our Director of Network Impact. This standard is made up of 10 indicators. We've got 6 musts, and they go from QAI 001 right through to QAI 006. We've got a should indicator, which is QAI 007, and then the best practice indicators, which are 3 indicators going from HSQA3 to HSQA5. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over to the lovely Steve, and he'll take you through each indicator in a bit more detail.
Good morning, everyone. So we're going to start to look through the indicators in the Quality and Impact Standard, starting with QAI 001. This indicator is essentially about showing your commitment to the quality process as outlined in the Homestart Handbook. And there are 2 aspects to that. The first aspect is complying with the Continuous Self-Assessment Programme, which started last year and runs through to 2026, where we take standards area by area and ask you to submit a self-assessment and some evidence. And the second element is the full quality review, which is a review of all the quality standards and all of the mandatory evidence, and would include doing some file checks and interviews with key people, trustees, staff, and volunteers. So the essence of QAI 001 is that you show as an organisation that you're complying with what's required. So now we're going to look in a bit more detail at the indicator Quality and Impact 002, which is around how you comply with all the laws and regulations that apply to your Homestart. We're going to focus on 2 areas. One is GDPR, and the second one will be health and safety. To help me with looking at the GDPR in more detail, I'm joined by my colleague Mike Sales, who I'm going to ask to introduce himself.
Hi there, my name's Michael Sales and I'm the Data Coordinator at Homestart UK.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks for joining us this morning. So I'm going to ask you to go through the GDPR checklist, which is one of the pieces of documentary evidence that we've asked local Homestarts to upload for us for this round. So if you could go through that, just picking out the really important points, first of all.
Of course. The GDPR checklist covers a number of different areas, many of them very, very important. I'd like to focus on just 3 of the main ones that I think local Homestarts will benefit from getting their staff members and their trustees on board with. The first of those, and it's the first on the list, is training. All staff and trustees should have training on GDPR, and these can be done as inductions when people start. One of the things that people should be told of at the very start is what are your breach processes. New staff, new trustees need to know who to report breaches to. It's a legal requirement to get back to someone like ICO, the Information Commissioner's Office, within a certain time period in order to report any significant or serious breaches. Other staff and trustees should also have refresher training. That may be refresher meetings, it may be online webinars or some formal courses, but these should take place regularly as well to keep abreast of all the local changes. You might have new systems, new ways of working, or other legal changes that the law needs you to comply with. The second one is about your record keeping. It is part of the law to do record of processing activities, which is AROPA, and also data protection impact assessments, shortened down to DPIAs. The difference between the two, AROPA should list and is a snapshot of all your processing activities, not just paper storage, but also all the electronic systems you have as well. The DPIA is more like a risk assessment, possibly of new systems you want to bring in, or very high risk systems that require a look at the security levels. Where is data being held? Is it in the UK, the EU, or around the world? Who's going to be using the systems? And that kind of risk assessment, that privacy by design, will prevent any breaches or risks getting too out of control. With regards to record keeping, again, you need to focus not just on your paper records, but electronic too. Your record of processing will have retention periods. It might be a legal period like finance. It might be a recommendation period that you've decided yourself. But both your CRMs and your emails will need to be purged of data or anonymized in order to comply with the law. You don't want to hold on, as one of the GDPR principles, to any data that you shouldn't be holding beyond a certain period. The final GDPR checklist point I like to bring attention to is privacy notices, whether it be families, volunteers, or even your staff. It's important to all members of the public and donors. You need to tell people what you're going to do with their information. They have a right to have their information deleted in circumstances, a right to access it. They need to be told how long you're going to keep it for, what systems it's going to be in, and in certain circumstances, photos, the case studies, you're going to need very explicit consent in able to use those. So those are the three things I would focus on as a starting point for home starts as part of the GDPR checklist, and getting those things right puts you in a really good position to get the rest of the checklist done. And don't forget to date when you do these things as well.
Thanks, Mike. When we're thinking about training, which, as you said, is very important, would that also cover volunteers as well as staff and trustees?
I would say yes. Basically, anyone that you've got that is underneath your banner, who's going to do some work for you, it's a very good idea, even in the briefest possible terms, to let them know about your GDPR ways of working. It may be a case they need to report something that's happened. What if they lose a phone that you've given them? What if they've tried to access a system because they're using your CRM and their laptop gets breached? It's very important for them, even as a minimal thing, to know things like the breach reporting process, who to speak to, how quickly to speak to them, and what are the routes to let them know about that. In general, it's just great practice to have people in your arena know about GDPR. We work with very vulnerable families, very vulnerable children, and volunteers themselves are vulnerable. It's a great idea to make sure people know about GDPR.
Thanks, Mike. And there is also an element on the checklist which is really about sort of the security of data and IT systems. Now that obviously is around cybersecurity, which we all know is like an ongoing and a current worry for all organizations. Could you just say a little bit about what the link is between data protection and cybersecurity?
Well, Given the world we live in, a lot of data has moved over from paper-based and files in drawers to electronic systems. It's a huge majority. And that means people don't just need to break into your office now. People can break into your systems from all over the world. So the link being really is that your electronic systems may have all kinds of access points, from phones to laptops to desktops. Security is important to change passwords. And in your systems, you might have reporting functions and ways to automate retention periods, popping dates in, or a button that you can press to be able to remove that. So ensuring your system is secure plays into all the things that GDPR require you to do. Who accesses it? How do they access it? How are you going to get data from it if someone subjects access requests, a SAR, their information? It's very important to know your IT systems inside and out, do regular checks, change passwords, do regular risk assessments to ensure they're suitable for purpose for your work, but nice and secure from the users that use the system and the clients that you have within that system. They align really well together, and we use these devices every day, and the more we use them, slightly higher risk there is of having a breach. So security is super important.
Thank you, Mike. And finally, just what's important in terms of how people complete the checklist so it can become a useful operational tool for them rather than just a tick box exercise.
To make the GDPR checklist a living document, really, it's a great idea to review it regularly. You should summarize the evidence on your comments page. Of course, you should sign and date it. You might want to check, obviously, as well, like the things within it about retention and risks, and also to ensure that all of this is managed and overseen by your GDPR lead trustee. Someone needs to be responsible for this. Do regular reviews of this work and make sure you sign and date everything so you know where you are at any one point and what you need to do next and the actions you need to take.
Thanks, Mike, for talking us through data protection and GDPR and the checklist. We're now staying with the indicator QAI002, and we're going to move on to look at health and safety. And I'm going to hand over to Chucky, my colleague at HSUK, ask her to say a little bit about what she does in relation to health and safety, and then she's going to go through the health and safety checklist with you.
So I am Chucky Palmer Patel, the Quality Compliance and Risk Manager at HSUK. I wear a lot of hats, but one of those hats is the Health and Safety Manager with HSUK. So I'm in charge of overseeing the health and safety policies, any induction, any on-site risk assessment, and things of that nature. So I'm just going to go through the health and safety checklist that you could access on at home and go through the 8 points of the checklist and talk a bit about what each point means. So the first point is the health and safety audit of the premises, including any satellite offices you have. So what this means is you go through your office, you make sure that everything is as it should be. Are your health and safety posters up and visible? Are your insurance requirements visible? Are there any visible areas of risk that you identified, any tripping hazards, anything that seems out of place that could be a potential danger? Are your first aid boxes up to date? Are your fire extinguishers being kept up to date? So this is just a general premise check that you should be doing at least once a year for a full audit, but you might do it more regularly as a routine check. So you might do a more regular monthly check just to make sure that everything is kept up to date. As part of health and safety, you should have an accident book. So anything that results in injury, I would recommend you also include near misses. And of course, if you have any major incidents, and this is where, this requires a trip to the hospital, let's say, that should be reported as part of your RITR investigation. So that's reporting of injuries, diseases, and dangerous occurrences regulation. And you could access that on hse.gov.uk. And there's a whole section of what is reportable and the forms to report it. So this is for all the nations of the UK. Just while I'm on the page, the HSE website is also a good resource for a lot of information or knowledge, and it's available to everyone. They also have templates. So they have templates, let's say, for your risk assessment. So requirement number 4 of the checklist is risk assessments, and they have a template of that on the HSE website. You can also find a template of it on the ARAG website. If you're part of the Premier Line Group Insurance, you can access ARAG for all sorts of health and safety tools. If you go to the main homepage, there's a health and safety section, and I recommend you go to policies and check out the blueprint, which is called Staff Health and Safety Health Check, which has an 8-step guide to how to develop a health and safety program. So things like the risk assessment, as I said, but they also have templates for policies. So for health and safety policies. For your risk assessments, you should be including anything on site. Also include risk assessment for travel. Because a lot of your volunteers would be traveling. Anything that is for home visits, that risk assessment will be dealt with under safeguarding. Risk assessments should also consider events or trips. So if you're renting out a location, if you're doing a fundraising off-site, you should do a risk assessment for each event. What else is on the checklist? Things like fire checks, fire safety. Do you have extinguishers? Do you have alarms? Are you doing fire drills roughly twice a year? Display screen equipment for staff. So that's if you're using a computer setup, you should be making sure that computer setup is fit for use, is fit for, you know, you're not getting aches and pains when you're using the computers. The eye screen service is all set up in a way that's optimal. So again, there is a template for the DSE that's available on the HSE website, and that one has pictures as part of the template, so I really recommend it. You should have annual records for driving, as you'll be driving, you know, for your volunteers who are for home visits. Make sure those are kept up to date and are being checked. And finally, you should have insurance to cover your activity. So whether that means you've opted into the Premier Line group insurance with Homestart UK, or whether you have your own insurance, you should have some form of insurance to cover your business activity.
Thank you, Chucky. That's really helpful. So just to point you in the direction of where you will find the resources provided by ARAG, they are on the insurance page on At Home, and there is a link and also the details of how to access that page. And as Chucky said, if you're part of the group insurance scheme and you have opted in to the ARAG service, those are all free of charge for you, and they are very detailed and very useful for you to dip into as and when you need them. So we're now going to look at the further indicators, starting now with QAI 003. QAI 003 is making sure that as a board, you understand where you are meeting the quality requirements laid out in the handbook, and also where you may have improvement actions to be able to meet them. The quality system is not about pass and fail, it's about continuous improvement. And what we want to see is that as a board, you understand what you're doing really well and what you need to improve. And if there is anything you need to improve, that there's an action plan in place which you are actively monitoring. Should anything happen where you feel there's a dispute between HS UK and yourselves, then the problem solving and dispute resolution process, as laid out in the handbook, is the process that you and us would use. And you just need to make sure that you're aware of that. Then moving on to QAI 004 through and QAI 005, both of those are around insurance. And they're very straightforward, that you must be able to demonstrate that you have adequate levels of insurance to cover all of your activities and that protects the families that are using your service, your staff and your volunteers, and that you must make sure that you consider the required protection levels that your organisation need, and that will be very dependent on what activities you are actually carrying out. QAI 006 is the last must requirement in this standard, and it's about participating in HS UK's national collection of data. And this is really important because it helps us measure the impact and quality of the services that you're providing to families. And we can use that in reports. We can use it in policy discussions. And it's really useful to have the information across the whole of the 4 nations because it helps us see where levels of need may differ. And we also have now introduced a quarterly data collection, but that is optional for you to do, but we would really encourage you to do it because it gives us more live and up-to-date data. So now we're going to move on to the last 4 indicators, which are shoulds. So these are the good practice indicators. QAI 007 encourages you to opt in to the HS UK group insurance scheme. One of the benefits of this is the more people that opt in, the cheaper the premium is, and also our insurance broker and Premier Line Insurance are very familiar with home starts and their activities, which you may not find with an alternative insurance provider. It is your choice about whether you opt into that. If you don't opt in, you must have adequate insurance in place and be able to show the relevant certificates and policies as evidence. Moving on to the next indicator, which is HSQA3. This is really about you showing at leadership team level, including the board, how you have learned from any concerns, complaints, feedback and compliments that are made about your service or about your organisation. It's good practice to try and do this annually, where you gather all of the methods of feedback that you get from people using your services and look about what is that telling you about the services you offer and your organisation. So indicator HSQA4 is essentially about strategic planning, and it asks that you have a document that sets out your strategic plan, or you may call it your operational plan or business plan, according to your local context. Normally, the strategic plan that would look ahead over 3 to 5 years, whereas the operational plan is often for the financial year. And the key things about this indicator are to explain how you have involved your various stakeholders in the development of your plan, and also how you monitor performance against the plan so you know whether the objectives are met or not. Finally, the last indicator in this standard is HSQA5. This indicator is how you use anonymized statistical data from families, volunteers, and referrers to actually report to your funders and donors. And most importantly, how you can use that to demonstrate the outcomes and impact of the services that you deliver. You will remember one of the things that we looked at in the previous round on operating a Home Start is how you report on outcomes and impact more regularly to the board. So this indicator is really focusing on how you report your quality and impact and outcomes externally.
Thanks, Steve. That's been really insightful. So obviously this round of self-assessment opens on the 1st of August, and the network have got until the 31st of October to do all of their self-assessments. Is that right?
That's correct. So it's the self-assessment against all the indicators that we've been through today, and we're just asking you to upload 2 pieces of evidence, which is your most recently completed GDPR checklist and your most recently completed health and safety checklist.
Fabulous. And they can upload those through the web form as usual.
Yes, that's correct.
Wonderful. The rest of this podcast is a more in-depth discussion around strategy. We'll be joined by Prue Reynolds, who's the chair of the Quality Reference Group at Home Start UK, and she's also a chair of trustees at Home Start Oxford, and she brings a wealth of knowledge working in the charity sector. We'll also be joined by Sarah McMullen, who's our Director of Network Impact here at Home Start UK.
If you're particularly interested in strategic planning, I'd encourage you to listen to the rest of the podcast. So we're now going to look in a bit more detail about indicator SQA4, which is around strategic planning, how that is done in organisations, who contributes to it, and also how you measure objectives to know that you're actually reaching your plan. So I'm joined today by Sarah McMullen from Home Start UK and Prue Reynolds, who's the chair of our Quality Reference Group and also a trustee. And I'm going to ask them 3 questions around strategic planning. And what I would say before we start is that there's no right or wrong way of doing strategic planning. It's very dependent upon your operating context and the size of your organisation. And also it can be influenced by the stability of your staff team and your trustee group. So when we have this discussion, please bear in mind that this is not the definite right way to do it. It's examples of what's good practice. So if we look at the first question, and I'm going to ask Sarah, first of all. Sarah, can you tell us in Home Start UK how you develop the strategic plan?
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, and I suppose the first thing to say is in development that stakeholder engagement is really, really important. When you develop a strategy, what you don't want to end up with is something that just exists on paper. This needs to be something that set out a long-term vision in a way that people are really motivated and inspired by, that gives people clarity and purpose in their roles. But also that there's a tangible plan associated with it, that you can see that long-term vision, but you've also got your plan of, well, how are you going to get there? What do people need to do to help bring that to life and make it happen? And so involving people at the start is really, really important. And like you said earlier, depending on the size of your organisation, etc., and the scale of your stakeholder network, this development stage might take less time or more time. So at Homestart UK, we have our trustees, our staff, and then we have the network. We exist to support the network to be sustainable and to grow and reach and impact, etc. So for us, engaging the network of Homestarts is really, really important. And then we may also want to involve funders and strategic partners, etc., to bring in that external perspective as well. So we would start with that stakeholder engagement exercise, listening to views, involving people, getting input to what they think the shape of the strategy should be. And then we might want to engage again partway through the process. So when we've looked at all the sort of data and insight and views, etc., and looked at the external landscape, and we've got a sort of emerging shape of strategy and where we think we need to focus, we might want to test it back in again with our stakeholders at that stage, see how the fit's feeling, before we get to the point of launching it.
Thank you, Sarah. Prue, can I come to you and ask you the same question from your experience of working in the local charity sector as a trustee?
Thank you, Steve. I think for me, my experience has been that the more you've had that discussion, as Sarah has mentioned, around the what do we think we want, where do we want to go, how are we going to get there, and who's it for, but who are we going to include in that process is, I think, critical. And I think when you're a new Homestart starting out, it's sometimes perhaps easier to do that, in that you've got a clean sheet, whereas if you may be a trustee coming into an existing Homestart where they may have done it one way, and perhaps you want to collaboratively work towards doing a more inclusive model, then that process can also take time. But I totally agree with what Sarah was saying, which is around the engagement of the stakeholders. For me, I think they're at two levels. You've got your immediate stakeholders, which are your staff, your trustees, your volunteers, and also your beneficiaries. And then there's that wider breadth of engagement, which is possibly linking into your funders, who are also having drivers that you might want to then include in your plan. But I really like the way that Sarah put it, which is in terms of starting out with where do we think we want to be? And this is, I think, again, where I said it's easier if you're a new one than when you've already got an existing plan that you're then moving forward. And also that idea of revisiting when you've got there and having the views. I do think from my own experience, it's also important to actually almost set the borders of what you're wanting to do within your plan, the boundaries, because I have had experience where it's been, well, we'd like to do this and this and this, and 3,000 things later on, you risk ending up having people feeling disappointed and disengaged, because actually you've given them the opportunity to express a wish list, but you haven't contained it enough within the boundaries for it to be realistic. And you might be saying you could do that in 10 years' time, but actually we can't do it at the moment. So for me, that's a critical one.
Thanks, Prue. And I think that's a really important point you made, to get that tension right. You want your strategic plan to be ambitious in its objectives, but you don't want it to be so overly ambitious that realistically you're never going to achieve those things. So thank you for making that point for us. I'm going to start my second question with you, Prue. So once you've agreed your strategic plan and the key objectives, in your experience as a trustee, How do you ensure that staff understand their contribution to delivering on those objectives?
I think it's really important to ensure that staff are kept abreast of how the plan is evolving, how it's working, where there may be hiccups. I think the risk for trustees sometimes is that that is then seen as a delegated responsibility through either the manager or the CEO, and that they do it rather than having that bringing everybody back together again that Sarah had mentioned in the first question of how do we think we're doing. And there's a risk then, I think, of perhaps staff feeling, and particularly volunteers and beneficiaries feeling out of the loop, and a risk that trustees don't have that more hands-on link with staff. So I think it's really important to plan for that within a year's program. Not that you are saying, well, you need to be doing this or that, but trustees do need to know and be sure that the operational is sufficiently robust to be able to deliver the strategic. So it's not you're not doing the operational, but you need to know that the operational is working. And that's really where you're giving the staff and the volunteers and beneficiaries the opportunity for feedback into the process.
Thank you, Prue. Coming to you, Sarah, could you talk a little bit about how Homestart UK as a bigger organisation with more layers of staff actually ensure staff are aware of their contribution to the strategic plan?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I think if, as far as possible, staff have been engaged at the development stage to some degree, so you've done the job of sort of buying people in. They get the big picture. They understand the overarching organisational purpose and mission and what we're trying to achieve through this strategy cycle. Then the next phase, in terms of implementing it, is making sure you've got that golden thread from strategy through to organisational plans. So this is how us as a whole team are going to deliver towards those strategic objectives. And then within that, empowering our team leaders or managers to set out how their plans, what's that team's contribution towards delivering that. And then the golden thread continues into individuals' objectives. And by making sure you've got that golden thread through all of the sort of organisational, into team, into individual objectives, the aim is that everybody, no matter what their role, should be able to see how they're contributing to the whole. And that really helps people stay inspired and motivated apart from anything else. They can see that they're part of something bigger and how their role is making a difference and contributing towards the vision and mission of the charity.
Thanks, Sarah. That's great. So a very practical way of doing that, obviously, for staff is to use the annual appraisal process and the midway point review to, first of all, check that the objectives match with the strategy, because sometimes, obviously, strategy changes over time and objectives change. And also, that's where you can also look at individual performance as well.
Yeah.
Thank you. So my final question, which leads on from what I've just said, and I'll ask Sarah this first. How in HS UK do we monitor performance against the strategic objectives?
So as a management team at Homestart UK, it's really important that we're looking at sort of performance data regularly to know how we're doing against our strategy. And so we do this through quarterly reporting. And so when the strategy is set and then the business plan is developed alongside that in terms of what we're actually going to deliver, it's really important to put measures against that. So being really clear on what does success look like? If we deliver this over the coming year, whether that's as an organisation, as teams or as individuals, what does good look like? And that might be about having some data. There might be some key performance indicators that we can put against it. But for some indicators, it might be more qualitative. but essentially all having a shared understanding of what good looks like, of what success looks like. And then for individuals, like you said, Steve, that's through their appraisals and one-to-one and supervision. Whereas for an organisation, we look at our quarterly reporting as a management team, and also some of that information goes up to the Board of Trustees as well. And we're just in the process of reviewing how we do quarterly performance reporting, actually, to move to a balanced scorecard approach, which to simplify that, because it sounds a bit complex, doesn't it? A balanced scorecard, what's that? Essentially, it sort of puts your KPIs, your performance reporting, into 4 boxes. It's looking at our impact. So what's the difference that we're making? So that might be to beneficiaries, but for us as Homestar UK, it's actually what's our impact for the network? It's thinking about people and culture. So are we creating the supportive, inclusive, engaging work environment that we need to for everyone to succeed? It's about financial sustainability. So what's our performance and sustainability looking like? Are we keeping that on track? And then it's about compliance. Are we meeting our sort of policy and regulatory requirements? And having that sort of balanced approach makes sure that you're reviewing all of the different boxes that matter to be able to deliver against your strategy over the longer term.
Thank you, Sarah. Prue, anything to add to that from the perspective of a trustee in the local charities?
Thank you, Steve. I have to say, Sarah, I think that sounds a really useful tool that we'll look forward to seeing and being able to apply it to us locally. And I think particularly around the impact in terms of, certainly at local level, it's our stories from families and volunteers. But I think it's really important to be doing that, not just for the odd one or two, or where you feel it's been particularly successful, but also where it perhaps hasn't been as successful, and then to be able to have the opportunity to explore why not. And that reflective practice, I think, is critical to everything that we do in terms of raising our standards. Could we do it better? And certainly when I've been on webinars within Home Start, and you're hearing from other local Home Starts how they've used those opportunities of reflective practice to sometimes to be absolutely clear that what they've done is absolutely 100% plus the best, but sometimes, and I think it's important that reflective practice isn't seen as being, oh, you didn't do that well, but really, how could we collectively do it in a more successful way? And that was brought home to me recently, hearing and being part of a webinar within the local authority, and every example they gave was, oh, it was wonderful, it was brilliant. And you end up thinking, yeah, but what about the other 100 that didn't think that, and you haven't made any mention? And I think we shouldn't be seeing that as a negative, but actually as a positive. So I think that, and certainly around the compliance, I mean, that's always a difficulty for trustees in terms of making sure that we are, but also for the network to have the opportunity to explore where perhaps there are reasons for that detached compliance, or I won't say non-compliance, but difficulty in reaching that compliance because of existing practice that has worked within a particular local Home Start and is not necessarily part of the overview. So I certainly, as a trustee, would look forward to seeing that. I can see us going around with, not as a tick box, when you, like a scorecard, it's your innings, let's see what you get. But thank you.
Thanks, Prue. So thank you both. And before we finish, were there any things you desperately wanted to say that you forgot to? Or Sarah, is there any points you want to make?
Yeah, I think, Steve, I'd just like to add that a strategy development process should be just a really brilliant opportunity to take a step back. I think we can all be so busy, can't we, in the day-to-day decision making and firefighting, etc., that it it hopefully should be really helpful to carve out and create that space where you can really think about what the priorities are, that reminder of why we're here, the core purpose, lean into some of the big risks perhaps that are in the external environment or that a local home start might be facing around sustainability or prioritisation or succession planning, and just really get back to the core of what we're here to do and prioritise really hard so you can get focus for the months and years ahead. And that's about listening and stakeholder engagement. It's about looking at all the data and insight that might be coming in from different sources. It's about listening to families. It's about what your, financial sustainability and your capacity and your resources are as a team. But just really making sure that you're prioritising what matters, and that you're setting an ambition that's inspiring, but also realistic and deliverable.
Thanks, Sarah. And the same for you, Prue. Is there anything that you wanted to add before we finish?
I really like the thought of the golden thread. I was very involved with that in terms of educational delivery in my own career. And I just feel that that's something that I would want to explore taking further, that in a sense of how does what we're doing with this particular activity link back to the golden thread? Do the people who are involved know? But I think for me, the dilemma as a trustee, perhaps the most pressing one at the moment, is around the pressures placed on our staff and trustees around meeting outside ideas for what could be in your strategic plan, and knowing, without wanting to refuse them outright, but actually risking at times deviating from what Home Start is absolutely all about. And for me, anything that we do within our strategic plan has to be around the common ethos of Home Start and the supporting families, the one-to-one support, the group work, as being the core of our work, and making sure that we don't deviate from that, and that special bond that our volunteers are able to achieve with our families that are so crucial to all other outcomes for those families.
Thanks, Prue. And I think that's the perfect note on which to end this conversation. Thank you both very much for taking your time to look at how strategic planning can be done. And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That brings us to the end of the Quality and Impact Standard. I hope you found this podcast helpful and that you've enjoyed listening to my colleagues to talk about data protection, health and safety, and strategy. Thank you very much for listening, and good luck with the self-assessment.